Well, I can provide a little entertainment for a second by saying that you provided me an old professor with three big documents. I spent a day on the little tiny one. And again, this old professor couldn't help but make edits and mark it up. My students will tell you how important I think the written word is. And so I think it would be one big job for these documents to be simply updated and made grammatically correct and things like that. So I have a flannel shirt on. I don't know if you can see, I wore jeans today because I figured I'd have to get, roll up my sleeves and get to work. So I'm willing to do that. And hopefully I've stalled long enough for Triple D to get us worked out and through the problems here.
I think he's calling back in. I think they've asked him to. They reached out to him by phone and said to call off and then call back in. Because it definitely was an issue that was locked in on his end.
Since we're waiting, maybe I could present an idea to the group to at least start thinking about. I've been asked by several town jurisdictions to help them with their reform efforts. And two of the things that we're doing that I'd sure recommend for this task force to consider is that I've been running calls for service, police services for those towns, and so that people and those groups like us can have a factual basis by which to look at how police services are being rendered. I would be willing to do that. We could get the information from the Erie Crime Analysis Center, break it down from each of the townships that the road patrol is responsible for, and we could have some local information that will hopefully inform the task force.
That sounds like a good idea, Marty.
Okay, great.
Hey, Marty, on that point, would you consider those
Are you there?
you're talking about where you have multiple police agencies in the same jurisdiction? State, for example, state police. You would have those statistics available too, so you can show the breakdown by town?
I only heard part of that, but if I had it by the town, I could certainly do that. If we had it, and if I just don't know if the troopers keeps their data in the CHARMS system where the Erie Crime Analysis Center stores the data. If they do, then absolutely yes.
Okay, sounds good.
I know they're talking to Dan on the phone right now, trying to get it so that the PowerPoint not only can be shared, but also the audio could be heard. So hopefully this will get resolved in a minute or two.
Okay. Can everybody hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. And
Yes.
everybody just sees the PowerPoint in front of them, correct?
Correct.
Awesome. All right. So as you can see, this gentleman here is John Campbell. John was the first sheriff of Erie County back when the county split from Niagara County. And so he stayed in office with Erie County, and Niagara County had to elect a new sheriff. This is back in 1821. But to give you a good lesson on just a real quick, how did the office of sheriff become from whence it came? There is a video here, and the speaker is presenting to a Tea Party group, so don't be triggered by that. The information that he's giving is correct and historical, and I believe that you will have a better understanding of why we have a sheriff's office today. There we go. Okay, does everybody see the video?
See it, can't hear.
Can you hear it now?
No.
No.
All right. All right, well then I'll give you the history real quick. Basically, the history of the office of sheriff came from England, and it was King Alfred, that created the office, as far as we know from Blackstone's writings. It is ancient. It was kept when the French or the attacked. They kept the office, so it is centuries old. The office was brought over to the United States when they began colonizing the United States, and so therefore it was created in all of the states. Some of the states, the majority of states, it's an elected office. It is separate and distinct within county government, and there are a few states where they're appointed. In New York State, the office of sheriff is, except for New York City, they are police officers in charge of county law enforcement. In New York City, the office has been reduced to handling only the civil process within the city limits. There we go. So constitutionally, the office was first created, as you can see, in April 1777 in the first constitutions, that they were appointed at the time, and nobody could hold any other office. In 1821, that changed. That's when it became elected. Sheriffs at one time were elected in England, but most of the time they were appointed by the king or queen. Today, The sheriff, and this is today's Constitution, so there shall be a sheriff in each county, chosen by the people, and they shall hold no other office. The governor may remove any elected sheriff, but basically can't do so until there's some due process given to the sheriff. There have actually been 2 sheriffs in Erie County removed by the governor, and that was for failure to perform their policing duties. They were not enforcing the law. At the time, there was 2 of them, and so the governor removed them. Looking back, 1813, Impey's sheriff's discussion basically said the sheriff, as principal conservator of the peace, is both by common law and special commission the first man or first person in the county, and they may apprehend, commit to prison all breaks or attempts to break the peace. It's basically doing what the sheriff is doing today. So this is from 1813. So if there's any question as to what the general duties are of the sheriff. Now, in the 50s, they took the common law, as everybody knows that our laws here, we are a common law country, and that tradition was brought here by the English. And in the 50s, they codified it in New York State Code. So the general duties of the sheriff is to perform the duties as prescribed by law as an officer of the court, just like officers of the court are lawyers, the judge, the clerks. The county clerk is actually an officer of the court also, because the county clerk is the repository for all records and is the general court clerk. The sheriff shall perform such additional duties as prescribed by law and directed by the Board of Supervisors or the county legislature. So besides state law, if the county legislature wanted the sheriff to perform additional duties, they could. When the sheriff receives any process, and that is anything to do with legal documents, the sheriff has to serve those processes, whether they're issued by the court or by a private person or by an attorney. And that's why we have the civil division. I know this is kind of a lot of language here, and I know it's blasphemy when using PowerPoint, but you will have a copy of this so you can read it. But what does it mean to be conservator of the peace? And that was decided in 1897 in Pierce versus Stevens, and Israel versus Stone cited that case and basically said the duties of the sheriff are in large measure the same as police. They're to enforce the laws, protect people, property, health, and the morals of the people. And the sheriff must enforce criminal law. So it is not, and the reason I put this in is because there's some question as to whether the sheriff is required to have a road patrol, and there's a lot of misunderstanding about that. The sheriff is not required to have a road patrol as cars running around, but the sheriff is required to enforce the law. And using a road patrol is today's state-of-the-art method of doing police function, being out in the community. You can take all the cars away from the sheriff, but the sheriff, by law and common law, is responsible for conserving the peace in the county. So there's plenty of common law and case law about this. In judiciary law is the posse comitatus. I'm sure all of you have heard of that. And it just means that the sheriff can use the power of the county. And that means deputizing people in assistance of enforcing the law or enforcing and executing orders of the court. Corrections law is what says that the sheriff has to have a jail and is responsible for maintaining a jail. What determines how much staff and what the sheriff does inside that jail is by regulation from the Commission of Correction in New York State. So we have many divisions. We have the Police Services Division, which is the conservator of the peace function, civil process, which serves process either by court or by private individuals, jail management, which is the function that I just described. Administrative services are the folks that handle purchasing and budgeting, and they're the ones that do the day-to-day functions, the behind-the-scenes payroll and personnel issues. The reserve division is there that most people see are like the guys on horseback, the mounted group, and they are the reserves to back up the services in all areas of the sheriff's office when the sheriff calls upon them. And special services are, for instance, special operations of the helicopter, the SWAT team, and all of those, the Marine Division, the things that you normally don't see every day. Now, here's something that I thought you guys would find interesting is Sheriff Howard actually is about 140 years old. As you can see, I found the first case that he ever made an arrest or did anything. Deputy Sheriff Howard seized some incubators back in the Pan Am Exposition. So I thought you would find that interesting. That is a quick overview of the sheriff's office, and I didn't want to bore you with that. But to give you an idea of that, the duties were created in England, and New York State continues that. There are some duties that the sheriff does in other states that was brought over with the office, and that is collecting taxes. In Louisiana and in West Virginia, not only do they have to do what we do here in New York State, they actually are the ones that have to collect the taxes, which I'm probably sure Sheriff Howard is tickled pink he doesn't have to collect taxes on top of all the other duties that he's responsible. But that was a quick and down and dirty. I don't want to spend too much time on that. But I wanted to give you an idea that it is not just a police department. It performs all the law enforcement functions that we know today in one office. It's a one-stop shop for law enforcement. Are there any questions before I stop? Okay. Well, Mr. Chair, I shall turn it over to you. And if at another time somebody else is interested, let them, you can contact me if you have any other questions. Marty, you got to unmute yourself.
Damn it. I did that last night too. All right. So thank you. You did a great job, Dan. And I said I'm much more educated now because of you. So thank you for that. All of us to the group, we received 3 big documents just a very short time ago. And if you're like me, you weren't able to get through all 3 documents to have detailed discourse about tonight. But I would suggest that we all need to get through this stuff. I'm open to talk about how we best digest all of this information regarding policies and procedures. I think we need to get through it pretty quickly before we have too much interaction with the public so that we look like we're informed and can respond to questions that they might have. I think there's a lot to get through, though, and I'm wondering about your input on just looking at these documents and maybe a pathway forward that would be productive for this group to get a handle on things that will ultimately lead towards change. That's what this is all about. I think I was teasing before about rolling up my sleeves, but I think the policies and procedures are really a focal point that this task force can have an impact on, that could make important changes come to reality. So I think we need to spend time on these and think about the best way to go get forward. So does anybody have any ideas or thoughts with what you've received, what you've read, or what you think a positive way forward would be in a quick way?
Marty, I think we just.
Can you hear me? This is Bill Krebs.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, so my first impression was that the policies and procedures were, very in depth. There's 3 volumes of it, but I would like to know from the experts whether, as they exist now, whether they're up to date. Especially something as sensitive as the use of force. Does that comply with the latest directives from the state as they're written? I mean, I'm as a layman, I wouldn't know that. So we could really target some of those areas in the policies and procedures if we had a critique from maybe somebody like you, Marty, who could tell us that no, this is out of date and it needs to be brought up to the standards of 2020 as mandated by recent legislation from New York State. I think that would help us. That's my opinion. Instead of going through, I could read the whole everything, sentence by sentence, and it still could, not register as in a critical way that perhaps it needs to be, even before we listen to the public. That's all.
May I make a quick comment on that? Can anybody hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
This is just hang on. Let me see if I can, because I'm in the middle of using 2 different devices here.
That didn't help, Isa. Did I start drinking without knowing it, or did I just see Mr. Feliz in double?
Yes, that's what it was. Is I had one of the devices disappear and I started with a different one. So hopefully, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay. In regards to the policy, I mean, I went over them, and it is, if you notice, most of the policies were updated back in 2016. In the criminal justice and policing universe, 4 years is it is a fairly long time, especially the last 4 or 5 years, where many things have changed. I mean, dramatically, and in the policies themselves, I mean, are a good framework. However, the details of and the nuances of the new things that may have happened and the new changes are not there. But I think that the sheriff will be able to provide us update on each individual policy, because not all of them need to be updated per se. but there's some that have changed dramatically. For example, there is no mention anywhere in those policies that I can see about an adolescent offender, so raise the age and so on and so forth, which is something that is very dramatic that has occurred in the past 3 years, affecting the 16, 17, and 18 years old. But I think that the sheriff can provide us, what it is that they are doing today in regards to those things that are not addressed or that are not updated in the present policies.
I agree with that, Mr. Feliz, and I would say that you've given a good example with the raise the age, and also the idea that we don't necessarily have to reinvent every wheel, just to look at the ones that we need to address. And use of force is certainly one. There is a use of force continuum that has been around for a long time. They have updated it though, Mr. Krebs, and we talk about a wheel as well as the continuum. And to get back to Mr. Feliz's point, there's certainly been recent changes that I think would be required to be put into these policies. I'm thinking specifically the governor and his direction to eliminate the use of chokeholds as one example. So that would certainly need to be updated. Does anybody else?
Yes. Can you hear me okay? I hear an echo.
I heard an echo, but you sound okay now.
Okay, sounds good. Some of the things that I was going to suggest is maybe as a group we can establish some norms. What are the things that we'd like to see? What are our priorities for this work? So that when we're looking at policies, we can compare them to those norms and decide whether or not that's something that we need to change. And then number two, identifying what our priorities are. So as a group, so just two things. As a group, what is it that we want to see? What is the outcome that we're looking to achieve? And within what framework? What are those norms? And then after we do that, what are some of the priorities? Like I heard, the use of force is an issue. Some other different things that we want to look at, because the documents are just so large, it'd be very difficult for us to get through all of these. And I agree with whoever said that, everything doesn't need to be changed, but there are some things that we should be prioritizing. So I don't know if the group is in agreement, but if we establish norms that we can filter this process by, that might help us guide our work.
Marty?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. But Holly, please jump in.
I'm just really agreeing with the group. We definitely have to have a scope of what we're looking, and I suggest really that County Executive Poloncarz give some guidance around what policies, he would like us to look at. I did read the use of force policy that was delivered to us, and actually it's very short. It's only a paragraph, and the first part about it is the use of force for the sheriff's office shall comply with the New York state law. And the second thing is when use of force is dispensed, they have a duty to report that they used force. So if the scope of the policy means that the use of force shall comply with the state, how could we or any other committee like ours make any recommendation that deviates from what the state law is? So we're talking, I heard you mention about the continuum, and that's good to talk about, but that kind of more falls under the training. So anyway, I guess we should put a scope around exactly what policies, with precision, what policies should we look at? And if those policies simply state that we'll comply with the state's policy, how are we going to affect change, or why or do we have to talk about them?
This is Mark Poloncarz. Not to say I want to get involved, but I think it's appropriate to respond to Holly's point. I would agree. You're not reviewing the policies on how to request time off in the sheriff's office. The particular ones that were addressed in the book that was provided by the state as to what this task force and the overall county is supposed to do, which was truthfully a list. I wouldn't say comprehensive because there's so many other things that could be covered, but a very tight list of the areas of concern. And it probably makes sense to just go back through that list and say, here's what the state has impaneled us, like the counties, the governments, because it's not just counties, it's also local governments, to examine from their police forces and to determine if they are acting in what would be considered best practices, and if not, come up with recommendations for it. So I think the scope has probably already been defined by the governor's office in the executive order that was signed by the governor and the guidelines in the guidebook that was provided. And I just want to note, if the group feels like they need more time to digest all this, meetings go ahead. I mean, we can set up additional meetings, and if things aren't working very well virtually, we can also do them in person again as need be. But I mean, we've got time. It's not as if we have to have a report out next week. Remember, it's really the report's got to be done by the end of March. So it's not like there has to be a super compressed time. And if you don't feel comfortable having had a chance to review all the appropriate policies, I understand that. That's fine, and we can schedule other dates.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Poloncarz. Judge Murphy.
Thank you. I'm glad Mark spoke up, because that's exactly what I was going to say, that the booklet that was handed out and that was emailed to us, I think that does give us the blueprint of where to start. But I also think that the community meetings are going to be very important, so that we can hear from individuals who can tell us their experience, both positive and negative. And then in the framework, as has been put up in the governor's resource guide. And then I think after knowing what our charge is under the booklets that we received at the last meeting, and after we hear from people to hear what their concerns are, what their experience have been, what they observed recently with the sheriff's department, you know, and everything that's been happening recently, I think that's going to help focus as to what policies, what things we need to look. And I don't think, I mean, and Marty, I might be wrong, but it would seem to me that we don't have to respond to the public as to their concerns. I think we are supposed to listen to their concerns. None of us collectively or individually are experts on the sheriff's department, nor would any member of the public think we're an expert on the sheriff's department. We all come to this with some degree that we hope to add to the final presentation and respond to the public. But I think our role is to listen, to understand, to ask questions of their concerns, then deliberate over that, look to our chart, and then start looking at these policies, and then perhaps bringing people back to the sheriff's department. I think Bill was correct as he first started. I think that at the state level, there are guidelines that are set for all law enforcement agencies, including the sheriff's department. So while we can make recommendations that may have farther reaching effect than just Erie County, I think our first job is to listen to the citizens of our community, and then get that in, follow the guidelines, and then look as to what restrains them. And then I think we'll be in a better to coalesce and figure out how do we divide up the work or what we need to do further.
I think that's really wise, sage advice, Your Honor. So I fully agree with that. The only thing that I would add, and it's one of my concerns, is that we also do our best to inform the community so that they can make a more informed contribution. If people speak from their hearts or from emotional standpoint is important, and we need to hear how the road patrol impacts people's lives. Don't get me wrong. But I also don't think that we should be making recommendations based on what people see in other parts of the country or what they think is true. I'll just give you a quick example. In one little town, first ring town, even a person on the town board, when asked how calls for police service do you think that your town responds to, the person said 300 to 500 a year. And it was actually, and this was a person on the town board, and the actual number was between 45,000 and 50,000 calls for police services, of which, now that I've recoded everything, 90% or about 45%, 45,000 of those calls were just that, police calls for police service. Cat in the tree, my husband had a heart attack, my hair's on fire, those kinds of things. And about 3 to 4% were for Part 2 uniform crime reports, or things we'd think of more like misdemeanors, and about 2% for serious offenses, Part 1. I thought it was interesting. This town actually shared with me already some information on use of force reports. So then I can tell you that in this town, it went from 50,000 calls in a year to about 100 to 150 times a police officer filled out a form that said that they used force. And then at the end of each year, I understand there's between about 5 to 8, maybe 10 complaints from citizens about police conduct. So again, my point is merely an informative one, and how people want to think about and deal with and respond to that information is totally up to them, and we need to listen to everyone. But I wouldn't like it if people were making claims that just weren't based in reality, regardless of what their positions were. So does anybody else, did that make sense to anybody, that we should be trying to do this? If it does, we would need somebody from the sheriff's office to make the request to get the data. Erie Crime Analysis Center doesn't own the data. Each agency does, but the DCJS is the repository for all of that information. And I've probably received 5 or 6 different data sets this week from other towns that have asked for some similar help. The other thing is that I have students, and I mentioned this before, but students that have are doing surveys as another way of getting community input, especially from those in the community that might not be the ones that we hear from the most, the silent majority, if you will. I think their voice needs to be heard as well. So any thoughts on trying to get the information and somehow getting that information out to people?
Marty, this is Isa.
Yes.
One of the things that we know, and the sheriff pretty much at the very first meeting, they made themselves available for any questions that we have. I had an opportunity to work with the sheriffs before, and you can take that at face value. If any one of us need any clarification on any of these policies and so on and so forth, they will be more than willing to to give us clarification, or specifically let us know or give us whatever it is that we need, including having an in-person meetings and so on and so forth. So that's kind of like a silent partner that we have on the side to assist us in evaluating some of the information that we have. But also, one of my this is me from my own personal perspective. The way that we do things in life, it is all depending based on how we were trained. Especially when things are critical, you always go back to the way that you were trained to do something. One of the things that I think we as a board perhaps need to take a look at or review is what is the training that the sheriffs go through, even though most of it, I will say the large majority, is state mandated, state dictated. The state is the one that has the curriculum. But how are they enhancing the training that they have with the time frame that they have available to them to meet those unique needs that they have with the community?
Excellent points. And I would tell you that you are absolutely correct. I believe it's pretty close to 80% of the curriculum for the police academy is dictated by DCJS and controlled by DCJS. They own the curriculum and they mandate what trainings get included in the academy. I believe each academy has a little wiggle room, maybe 20%, to look at topics that they are interested in. So that's, I agree with that. I think we do need to, I think the training is a very specific place that we might be able to help out in this endeavor. And I agree, we do have a good partner. We have good partners, actually, both with the sheriff and his office, but also County Executive Polenkars has been very forthcoming and willing to help in any way. So I think we should then get that information and move forward. That's my suggestion. Anyone else?
Marty, if we go back to what was handed out to us that the governor's put out, if you look at the table of contents, I think everything is just what we were saying here. You look at what are the key questions and insight for consideration. And on the table of contents, the first area is what functions should the police perform? So when you were saying getting the data, so we understand what functions does the sheriff's department perform. And our job is to look at determining their role, their staffing, their budget, their equipment for their department. So that's one. Two is employing smart and effective policy standards and strategies. And then it's broken down to what we're talking about: procedural justice and community policy and community policing, enforcement strategies to reduce racial disparities and build trust, and three, community engagement. And then four, so so the fourth thing is the way it's set up here, and given, I know that Marcus says we've got a lot of time, but as I remember from the last meeting, we have to have our finished product, our plan, by the end of February. So we have 4 months. There's 4 key things here, including what was just talked about: recruiting and supporting excellent personnel, which is all about training and diversity and bringing people on the force, training and continuing education, supporting officers' wellness and well-being, how to have a diverse workforce. Sorry about that. That's a telemarketer. Let me just hang up. So anyway, it seems like, Marty, maybe what we should do is take these 4 things that are outlined right in the table of contents, and because we don't have that much time, except we all have to be part of listening to what the community is saying to us, why don't we have everybody look at this and then figure out which area do they think, based on why they came to this committee, that they have interests, and divide the work so that we can move effectively and within groups, and then come back to the whole group saying this is the information we need for this section. So we have section 1, section 2, section 3, section 4. And instead of just listening and being fed information, smaller groups can sit down and divide this up and get to what our mission is. So I think, I'm just a suggestion, Marty, but it just seems to me that maybe that's a very good outline for us to organize our tasks and then have us all, instead of being one big group, because it's hard to do things in a big group, maybe people can email you with the areas of these 4 things that they list, and then you can form little subcommittees so that we can work together, do our own little private meetings like this, and then, set forth the kind of information, the kind of stuff we need to look at, and where we're going to find the resources, so that the group of the whole, when we're starting to write a plan, we have everything together.
Mm-hmm. Does anybody else have any input before I respond to the judge?
Yeah, this is Miles. Hi, everybody. So it seemed, I mean, going back to Melody's point of, figuring out what our priorities were, and then I think we've identified some priorities, and I think the judge has given some good advice in terms of how to maybe approach that problem. But it seems like I'm just taking some notes. The things that have come up thus far are training, use of force, and then Marty, you mentioned service calls. So it seems like there may be instances where the police are called, or the sheriff's office are called to situations where maybe they don't need to be called. If there's 40,000 calls and only a couple hundred of them are for actual crimes, maybe that's something we could look at. I would also maybe want to take a look at just to Issa's point of how the sheriffs serve the needs of their particular community, the hiring process, and making sure that we're hiring folks that are representative of the community, and then also maybe discipline, and just in terms of how discipline is meted out for misconduct. I don't think that most deputies are ever commit misconduct. But I think that this task force was formed because of the actions of the minority of law enforcement officers in this country, and so we have to kind of be mindful of what happens. What are the consequences for breaking the rules? So for me, it's training, use of force, hiring, discipline, and service calls. I also think that the list shouldn't be exhaustive until, as the judge pointed out, we hear from the community, and give them time to express, their concerns and talk about things that went well with the sheriff's department and things that didn't, and that could better inform, what it is we need to be fine tuning. That's all.
Excellent, Miles. Also, important insight, and I think again, just overseeing, thinking about this whole topic, hiring and discipline and accountability is going to be central to making forward advances for everyone on both sides of this equation. So I'm all for that. Anybody else?
Marty, this is Bill Krebs again. I like your idea of starting with the data. I think we really do need to have that, and then I guess you said you code it somehow that we know what the sheriff deputies are responding to in their course of being on road patrol. And I think that's very important. I'm from the Village of Springville. We've already started this process, and community policing is very important. And I'm guessing that a lot of those calls you were talking about are community policing, and that's certainly part of the thing we're supposed to look at in the state mandate. It's under the second part, employing smart and effective policing. Number 3, community engagement. But we have to know what the Erie County Sheriff is doing, and if they're doing a lot of community policing, then our report, or we should know that. We should know that that's not a need, that's something that has to be, fleshed out in a new policy statement, because they're already doing that. So I think the data and the breakdown of that data is very important. But I also agree that we should go through that the state has mandated what we need to look at. And if it is on the table of contents, but you can go through the book and make your own outline. We could do that. And I'm not opposed to breaking into groups and having each group, do that either, and then come back. And then we can listen to the community, and we'll have a better idea. At least I'll have a better idea of what the Erie County Sheriff deputies are really doing when they're out working. That's, so I like what I've heard so far.
Yep, excellent. And I got to say that you just said something that I really hadn't thought about it in the way that you just mentioned, and that is, there's lots of talk about what Miles brought up, that maybe police don't have to do all of the things that our communities have been asking them to do, and that's, I think, received a great deal of traction. On the other hand, like you just aptly pointed out, a great deal of those things are the things that people are also screaming for, which is improved relationships and stronger community policing initiatives. And so while I guess I had thought maybe those two things were separate, maybe they're not. And maybe one helps the other. If the only time the community sees the police is when they're responding to a serious incident, maybe both sides aren't going to be better off at the end of that relationship. So not that I have a position on it, but I think it's a really interesting question, and one that deserves further consideration and input from everybody on this committee, but also the community. And I would say that Judge Murphy is, I think it is, again, wise that we break up into groups and try to figure this out. When I was asked to be chair, my first response was that I think it's really important that we look at what the governor is mandating, and that we define very specifically what our focus is supposed to be, but also focus or define what our focus is not. I could imagine people from all different walks of our communities could ask for things from us that is far afield from what our scope is supposed to be. So I do think we have to be able to say, and Melody, I think you started things off in the way that I really liked it, in that I think before we do any of this stuff, we need some better structure on what I wrote was maybe it's a vision statement, but or a mission statement, but you mentioned the scope of what we need to do, and a framework for how we plan on doing it. And I think that is a really good place to start. We should have some goals and objectives to begin with, so we know where we're headed. And then as a matter of efficiencies, I think we should break the group into groups so that we can separate and conquer, and then come back together and report out to the group. Maybe those could be in person, but I know that this crazy technology allows for breakout groups and stuff like that. We can try to figure that nonsense out, but we could certainly do that. And I think that those between Judge Murphy and Mr. Gresham, I think we've already got a pretty good understanding of the main areas that we should be focusing on. And I think if we could do something meaningful in those areas, I would call whatever we come up with a huge success, because those are really, really important and relevant topics that I think are at the heart of all of our challenges today in our communities. So I am willing to go through and look at first the what's it called, table of contents, and then pull out, some reasonable number from within the document of those main topics. I will try to err on the liberal side and make my list longer than it probably needs to be, so that then this group can decide which ones we should parse out and which ones we should focus on. Once we do that, we could also then start breaking up into groups. I am wondering out loud if we should be asking for volunteers, or if that was a volunteer of the being chair. Hopefully you're hearing me giggle a little bit, but to take a whack, maybe we could have somebody take a crack at like a vision or a mission statement. I think the scope is what I was talking about. I'd be happy to do that. I'm happy to try to take a crack at any of them or all of them if the group wants, if that facilitates things to get done more quickly. And my only concern so far is one of time, and it's not the time that we need to get everything done. I'll freak out with the rest of you later as we get closer to that deadline. But our more immediate deadline is one I think we need to talk about. We all received meeting invitations to include the public, 2 of them next week. And Miles had brought up that maybe he thought it was a little early because we won't have time to publicize this and get public feedback. And I think he made a very good argument that, if we don't include people and honestly give everybody a voice, whatever we come up with is going to be criticized and made hopefully not worthless. But I fear that, and I want people to know that we gave everybody a fair shot, and that it's not up to them. At the end of the day, I want to hear all about their opinions and their beliefs. But at the end of the day, I don't think that's the most important thing, and I don't want to sound offensive. And I'll say it this way: I don't think my attitudes and beliefs are any more important than theirs. I think what we need to do is to listen to everybody's attitudes and perceptions and ideas, and then as a group, we need to come to some consensus on how we feel on these major areas and be willing to make some kind of recommendations in these areas. And then at the end of the day, as Judge Murphy, I'm going to pick on you again. Sometimes you have to make a decision, and you're going to have some people that aren't going to be happy, and sometimes nobody's happy. When I've had those instances, that usually means I was neutral and did something correct. However, what to me is more important is that regardless of whether we make people happy or not, that we have solid ground upon which that we make our recommendations. One of my concerns about the policy manual is that they say lots of things, but we don't know if these are best practices, how they came to be, what information was used to make them. There's statements in there that says things like, it has been well documented that training does this, this, and this, and we don't have any citations or sources or history of why we think those things are true. So my point is, we need an open and fair process We need to listen to everybody, but at the end of the day, it's going to be this committee based on those things and information that we collect, that we make some recommendations, and that we can all be satisfied that we did a reasonable job. Judge Murphy, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, Marty, the whole thing is, I agree with you about, I didn't get, I read the whole thing, and I agree with you that it makes some assumptions. But what I did like about it was the one-page table of contents. And everything we said here falls into those 4 categories. And quite frankly, at the end, we're gonna have to write something. And now I'm putting my hat on, and please, I'm no longer a judge, haven't been one for 18 years, I'm just Margaret, okay? So we'll start there, so we're all of the same understanding. But I will tell you this, before I went to law school and I was worked for the city of Buffalo as a city planner, grant writer, one thing is, hey, the state asked us to do something. We're going to make it our own. We're going to make it reflective of our community and reflective of this group and reflective of the conversations, and we're going to be listening to people, especially like people like, Miles has, I actually 100% agree with him. It's a little bit too soon to bring people in, and we haven't given them enough notice when we don't even know what direction we're going in. But it would seem to me, Marty, that if we could just follow the format, answer their questions, they've set it up. And if they've said things in the rest of it that we think is, we don't believe that's an answer to our community. We don't think that's an answering to what's happening. Then let's follow their format, and let's be, so that when we write a document, it literally is these 4 questions and these answers. Now, what we put in between the line, that's the important stuff. And then we don't have to worry about, did we cover everything? What did we miss? We've covered everything, and there's not one single topic that was brought here tonight that didn't, about internal accountability, citizen oversight, and external accountability. This is for police action. So every single topic we've discussed is in the table of contents. So if I sort of feel like, and Marty, I'm just looking at that. I want to make sure that the time that I put to this committee and all of us, I think, wants to be meaningful, and so that I can contribute. But I'm telling you, I think if we all together look this over, you can look at the sections, what they write, and you can ignore those. But if you look at the questions and say, I'm interested in that question. I'm interested in that question. That's exactly what I was talking about. And then communicate that. And we have got to have a central person, Marty, which I think the county executive picked you, that we write to you. These are the areas that we can tell you where that we have background or we have interests. And then after we get back for a second meeting, now we can formulate our plan and then start. And I think Miles is right. I think it's a little too soon to bring the citizens in until we know a little bit more how this whole thing works. So let's know a little bit more, like Bill says, about what does the sheriff department do, and then kind of get a grip, so we kind of have a little bit of an idea. And then maybe when it's time to talk, have the public come in. I don't want to limit anybody in what they say. And you're right, there may be people who will come in and it's going to be a political soapbox that doesn't really get us where we have to go, but I still think we have to listen. But I think the main thing is we can also say, here is what we're interested in hearing. Does anybody have anything to say about recruitment, diversity, oversight, accountability? I mean, maybe after we do this and our little committees are formed, we can even help the public say, here's some areas that if you want to speak to these issues, we want you to speak about everything, but so that we know, particularly when someone says, I'm John Smith and I'm from such and such a community and I have an experience that goes to this. At least we know under these categories, who's listening and can be mindful to ask the questions that we need to hear from the public. But I think maybe we might even want to talk to our county executive that maybe there is a way that some people won't feel comfortable in publicly appearing or speaking, but may want to find a way that on a topic that they may want to have to write something. And that's part of what we're looking at. We can redact names or whatever and be sent to whatever section we divided it up into that address those needs too. So that's the only other thing I was going to say, but
I love your ideas. Go ahead.
I'm done.
Was there somebody else? So I love that idea.
Yeah.
Melody?
Yes. One other thing that I'd love to do to take a look at policies. Perhaps, each one of us could look at different policies that might be working in other parts of the country or in other counties or even in other countries per se, and bring those back and use those as a guide and something, a reference. Marty, I think you said a little bit earlier, let's not reinvent the wheel. If there are opportunities to leverage existing information to improve our efficiency, let's do it. So I don't know if there are policies available that people know of already, but as a researcher, I will be certainly looking at policies that have some evidence or some support that they've worked.
Excellent. And Melody, I remembered from your introduction, you're somebody that I'm going to keep a close eye and pay close attention to. Did you say statistician? That put a big smile on my face. And Isak is giggling too, because he knows I like to crunch the numbers. So we'll be in touch. I'd love to combine your idea with Margaret's. And although I do think you get that title for the rest of your life, but anyways, maybe
Not the paycheck. Not the paycheck. Grab the title, but the paycheck did run out 18 years ago, so I'm fine with just being Margaret. Okay.
Okay. Maybe what we do is everybody send me an email at mfloss, M as in Marty, FLOSS, like dental floss, mfloss at Hilbert, HILBERT.edu. I have all of your email addresses. I will send you an email. I'm an idiot. That'll be a lot easier. And then you can respond to me. Hopefully, I'm just trying to think if there is a way, if you were my students and we were on Blackboard, we would all be sharing the same thing and you could see that everybody jumped on one committee and left the other cupboard bare, and we could all try to spread out. So send me your stuff. I'll figure it out. I'll keep communicating back with everybody and say, hey, we have too many in this and too many of that, or not enough here. And then we could take Melody's idea once you have an area and it's something you feel that you are interested in and you have some experience or both. Then you can start looking at high and low for different policies and procedures, so we don't have to reinvent the wheel. And if you could send me I guess I should, in my first email, I will identify those 4 or 5 or 6 areas, and then we'll take it from there. Is that a plan?
That's good.
Okay. And we're only 6 minutes over, but I would definitely just blame our video presentation. So it wasn't you, it wasn't me. No, I'm teasing. I just like to tease Dan. So and
Hey,
that
Marty.
was actually very informative. Yes.
Marty, John Green from the Sheriff's Office.
Yes.
Could we just ask from an operational standpoint, there's going to be information you're going to be requesting, and you've alluded to some of it tonight, that if you could just send us something in writing, what exact information you're looking for, because if I'm providing you with too much or not enough, we're never going to get to the ends that you all need to get to. So we would just ask that you specifically email, you can address it to me and I'll make sure it makes it to the appropriate folks within my organization, If you're looking for specific information, what that specific information is, as detailed as possible,
excellent.
so that we can give you what you need.
That's excellent. And Jamie Giamarisi, the director over at Erie Crime Analysis Center, and Kevin Skellinger are probably sick of me this week. They've sent me a bunch of stuff. So in his last email from Kevin was, do you just want it in the same format? So we're getting to be buddies on this. So I will definitely be able to get that to you. And I will also say that at least the call data, I don't see any issues, but depending on what other information, if there's anything that is personally sensitive, we have to be ultra safe with. We have several attorneys on this committee. We need to keep things private that need to be held private, and I will try to get information in a way that is redacted of any personal information, so that things like this, we can protect everybody. We want to know, but we don't want to hurt things either. Okay. So do we have working orders? Is there anything else that anybody wants to bring up, or any more homework you want to give this old professor?
Just
Marty?
one more thing, Marty.
Yes.
Are we pushing out the public meetings that were scheduled for next week?
I would sure like to.
Okay.
What does the rest of the group feel?
Yes. We have to delay them. They haven't even been advertised. You can't have a public meeting unless it's 10 days. We have to advertise public meetings in the future.
This is Mark Poloncarz. This is not the same as a legislative body. And I guarantee you, if we advertise them, no one's going to see them in the advertised papers anyway. We use social media. We advertise heavily the first meeting, and only one individual from the public showed. Media, as one media member has told me, they're not interested in covering this. They don't think it's important. So I think it's important that the people involved advertise it. If you want to push back the meetings, that's great. But I'm telling you, you're going to start meeting 2 and 3 times a week in November, December, and January. And if you're willing to do that, so be it. But I think this is not something where you're going to be able to push back the public meetings until November or December, like at the end of November, early December. You're going to really run into tough times. Because remember, we're going to have holidays. We're going to have tough times getting meetings scheduled with all the holidays through at least early January. And as Margaret noted, it really is the end of February in which this has to be prepared. There is a very compressed timeline. So I would suggest that if you are going to think about holding additional meetings for the public, that's fine. I would keep one of the meetings still next week. We've already let the media know it. You haven't seen them advertise it because, as you see, they really don't seem interested in it. But we're going to continue to push it. But I would suggest keeping at least one of those meetings and schedule more. But if you're going to think about not taking the initial public comment until January or late December, it's going to be too late.
Yeah,
Mark, I think.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I think those are good points, Mark. And I don't think we should wait until like the end of November. I was thinking like maybe just right after Election Day. And I know how it is, especially with public officials. They have great programs, and they go to great lengths to tell the public about it and make sure that people know. And then at the meetings, like 2 people show up.
Shows.
So I get that. I know that people have expressed interest to me in publicly commenting. And, I know that there is interest among the general populace. I don't know that, it's matched by the media's enthusiasm, but I think that we should at least wait a week or 2 until we have a chance to digest the material and, be ready to take public comment, and then also give them some notice. So I would suggest maybe a week or 2. That's all.
The other thing we're trying to get out into the information to the public is the email. Not everyone's going to be able to attend a virtual meeting or an in-person meeting, but they can send information by email. So that is currently out there, ecpolicereform@erie.gov. I don't know what's been received, if anything, as of this point. Andrew McLaren would know that and would share it with you. So we don't have a problem. It's up to you if you want to hold one of the meetings next week. If you want to wait, we're fine with that. But I do note that it's going to be a really compressed time if it drags on. And I know exactly, because we deal with it all the time. We set deadlines for filings, and then people come up 2 weeks later saying, "Oh, I didn't realize I needed to file 2 weeks ago." It's just going to happen. So we'll get the information out to the media. We'll spread it on our social media channels. We have already been for the 2 meetings scheduled for next week. We'll push it back if need be, but I think just reminding everyone that we're going to try to make it as easy for the public to respond. I used this adage at a press conference yesterday because it's true. We've got $10 million set aside for rental and mortgage assistance. And so far, we thought we'd need much more. And so far, we've got $2,300,000 in requests. And I've talked to landlords, and they're like, we're telling people to do this, and they're not doing it. So you can lead a horse to water, but you can't always make it drink. So we'll hold the meetings. We'll schedule more, but if we can, hopefully we get a good response.
It just dawned on me that if we keep the meetings the way they are and nobody shows up, we don't need to hold any kind of committee work at that point. If 3 people show up next week and speak their piece, we can listen to those 3. But I think the idea of and then adding more a week or so later, like Miles suggested, might be a good idea.
Marty, wouldn't it make sense that their meeting is scheduled for next Tuesday? Okay, today's Thursday. Next Tuesday, that will give us all of this group to email you after we've gone over that table of content, tell you the area we're interested in. Then next Tuesday, it really will be us forming committees, us meeting one more time, and then having one meeting where we can lay out, each committee can give a report as to this is what we like to look at, and this is when we think the public we need to schedule. And I agree with Miles, right after the election would be a perfect time. I'm sure whatever the election results are, there will be people who will be interested in speaking. So I think we should keep next Tuesday meeting as scheduled because it's an evening meeting. And I think we should then have our requests and start forming our committees and us breaking up into smaller groups and then keeping a very tight deadline so that we don't let this thing lag too long.
Sounds good to me. How's everybody else though?
This is Cesar. What is the purpose? I mean, was there a defined purpose for these 2 meetings? Because we can actually set what goals we want for those particular meetings. It could be something as simple as explaining what our role is as an organization, as a board, and soliciting input from the public or from whoever is available. Not necessarily make it a meeting like we have done today, that we have actually come up with concrete actions and steps and so on and so forth, but at least give the opportunity to the public for them to at least, see whom we are, what is the overarching goal of what we're doing, and allow them to provide input.
I love it. Because then at the end of the day, we get to say, we provided this many opportunities. We started right away. If we decide that we need more opportunities for public comment, we can make those available. And we do what Mr. Feliz just said, which is, here's what our charge is. This is what we're trying to do. Does anybody have any information that they want, the citizens to give us input? It gets the ball rolling. I like it.
That was the intention of the 2 meetings. It wasn't so much to be a back and forth, but to present an opportunity for the public to speak on any concern that they had related to this committee and the sheriff's office. And then if there was a feeling that there needed to be more meetings, to schedule those as well. I have to run, but my staff's still on they can resolve those issues. So if you make a decision ASAP with regards to holding it next week, great. If not, we'll try to schedule it as soon as possible thereafter. But the idea was just to take comment from the public. It was not going to be a back and forth. Having held a lot of public meetings where we had to take comment for the public, I've sat there and just nodded my head, yes, and they want a response, but the idea is to give the opportunity for the public to comment on it. It's not to be a back and forth, a colloquy, so to speak. It's a soliloquy.
Thank you, Mark.
All right, I got to go. Bye, everyone.
Okay. Good night.
Marty, I'm just not available, because I just saw it for the first time at the 26th meeting, because it was scheduled during my work day. And that's the day before my board meeting, and I'm usually swamped, as well as on the 27th, right after the board meeting. So I can't make the 26th. I can do the 27th, though.
Okay. Yeah, I think we're going to probably have a bunch of that, especially in the middle of the day. I'm not teaching then, so I will certainly make myself available, and we'll take whatever crew we can come up with and have a solid front and listen to whoever wants to contribute and welcome their voices. So we got a plan. I'll send something to all of you. You pick your areas. I'll try to keep you updated so that if I have to be a mean chair and ask for people to move to different buckets so that we get some even coverage, I might have to do that. But other than that, once you get into a bucket and into an area, you can start meeting as a subcommittee. We can start looking at what we know around the nation and world about that area and those policies, and we'll have our meeting the 2 meetings next week. We'll give people an opportunity to present their thoughts and feelings and suggestions, and then we'll have more working groups like this events where we can get more work done. And if we decide then that we need more time for public engagement, then we request that. And I think you're all right. We're going to have some pretty tightly scheduled set of dates so that we can move this forward. So, does anyone have any comments on that? Sounds like a plan. Everybody wants to go see the debate. It's not going to be me that holds the mute button, but apparently we're going to get a mute button tonight in the presidential debate. It'll be nice to be able to hear one person speak and then another. So anyways, thank you very much, everybody. I greatly appreciate everybody's time, your expertise. You were all picked because you were individually awesome in our communities. And for that, I greatly thank you. And I will be in touch, and I'll send you an email so you can reply to all and have everybody's emails. Okay?
Thank you.
Thanks,
okay. Have a great night, everybody. Be well.
Good night, everyone.